It started with a bark. Not just any bark, but the kind that makes your skin crawl. Shadow, the K9 dog, lunged at a student's backpack during morning roll call, and that's when they found it. A live timer, ticking, inside a high school. But what if I told you that wasn't even the real danger? Because what Shadow uncovered next would shake the town of Redwood Falls to its core. Hidden files, Cold War secrets, and a teacher's past no one ever saw coming. What would you do if your dog sniffed out a lie buried for 40 years? Hit subscribe for more real animal hero stories, and drop a comment below. Do you think Shadow sensed more than just a bomb? The wind that morning carried a chill that cut through the trees like glass, whispering through the evergreens lining the edges of Redwood Falls. This small Oregon town, cradled between dense forests and the rising mist of the Cascade foothills, often felt like it existed outside of time. The sun had only just risen, casting muted gold across the frosted grass of the school lawn. At Redwood Union High, the day had begun like any other, a buzz of adolescent chatter, the creak of locker doors, the smell of burnt coffee drifting from the staff lounge. Officer Elijah Granger stood near the main entrance, his posture as straight as a rifle stock. At 41, Elijah bore the quiet discipline of a man who had once led soldiers in a battle and now counted hall passes and lunch breaks. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a square jaw and short-cropped brown hair just starting to gray at the temples. The faint scar along his right cheekbone, an old wound from a roadside explosion in Helmand Province. Never quite healed, but it no longer throbbed. His dark blue security jacket stretched across his frame, his badge glinting faintly in the soft morning light. His eyes, a flinty gray, scanned the hallway not with suspicion, but with habit. Even in this sleepy town, vigilance came second nature. His left hand rested near his utility belt, the other holding a leash connected to his partner, a Belgian Malinois named Shadow. Shadow was 5 years old, lithe and alert, with a sleek, sable coat that shimmered under the fluorescence. His ears stood like sentinels, and his amber eyes flicked between students with unnerving intelligence. Once a bomb detection dog in Afghanistan, Shadow had been reassigned to Elijah after a mission went sideways and both handler and dog were medically retired. Elijah didn't talk about that last deployment, and Shadow didn't have to. They shared a silence forged in gunfire and loss. The pair had become part of the district's new school safety integration program, a soft PR effort to reassure parents while quietly addressing threats no one wanted to admit were growing in rural America. The students liked Shadow. They tossed tennis balls between classes, left little treats taped to Elijah's desk, and even created a meme page for him, Sir Wolfsalot. It was 8:04 a.m. when the shift happened. Shadow's ears twitched first, then his nose lifted as if catching something on the wind. Elijah noticed it instantly. The dog's muscles tensed, tail lowering, eyes narrowing toward the hallway of lockers just outside the chemistry lab. Elijah squeezed the leash instinctively. "Easy, boy," he murmured. Students passed by unaware, laughter bouncing off the lockers. Among them walked Miles Petrov, a junior, slender and pale, always dressed in the same faded gray hoodie no matter the weather. Miles was known for being quiet, sometimes too quiet, a loner by choice or survival. His messy brown hair often fell in his eyes, and he rarely made eye contact. The staff knew his background, a broken home, bounced between relatives, and a well-documented history of being bullied, especially by the football crowd. Shadow didn't growl. He stiffened. He locked onto a locker 3 units down from Miles and let out a single, sharp bark. Then another. The bark wasn't playful. It was the signal, the one Elijah hadn't heard since Helmand. "Shadow, sit," Elijah ordered, but the dog didn't budge. Instead, Shadow lunged, snout pressed against locker 214, claws scraping the tiles. The air shifted. Elijah's instincts surged like a wave crashing against old defenses. The hallway noise died as students turned. A teacher peeked out of room 3A, her brow creased. Elijah stepped in front of Shadow, radio in hand. "This is Granger," he said evenly. "We've got a possible code red." "Repeat, code red." Initiate evacuation protocol. The intercom crackled moments later, Principal Holloway's voice calm but firm. All staff initiate lockdown procedure and evacuate immediately. This is not a drill. Students screamed. Teachers herded them toward exits like sheep under fire. Elijah stayed rooted, his eyes on Shadow, who had now sat stiffly, body coiled like a spring, nose to the locker's handle. The hallway cleared in under 2 minutes. Within 5, local law enforcement had arrived. Sheriff Terry Long, a stocky man in his late 50s with a salt and pepper beard and skeptical eyes, joined Elijah near the scene. Dressed in khaki uniform and bulletproof vest, he approached slowly, lips set in a grim line. "You sure it's not a false hit?" Terry asked, his voice low. Elijah shook his head. "Shadows never missed. Not once. And the locker? It belongs to Miles Petrov." The sheriff frowned. "That boy doesn't seem the type." "That's the problem," Elijah muttered. The bomb squad, a specialized team from Salem, arrived at 8:51 a.m., dressed in bulky suits and carrying their gear with clinical precision. As they unlocked locker 214, the hallway fell into a deathly silence. Then came the words no one wanted to hear. "It's live." Timer set for 9:17. 10 minutes to detonation. Everyone was ushered back. The bomb was safely removed to the parking lot and defused in a containment unit. But the question lingered in every officer's eyes. How did it get there? Miles was found sitting alone by the bleachers behind the gym, knees hugged to his chest. When approached, he didn't run. He didn't even flinch. He just looked up at Elijah with hollow eyes. "I didn't do it," he said softly. "I didn't even bring my backpack today. That's not mine." Shadow stood beside Elijah, tail low, ears twitching. The boy's voice didn't lie, not to a dog like Shadow. Elijah sensed it too. There was something off, something deeper than a teenage grudge or a science experiment gone wrong. Later, as the sun climbed higher, melting away the frost from the lawn, Elijah paced alone in the locker hallway. The custodian had reopened the tattered locker for further inspection. Elijah kneeled beside Shadow, scanning the interior. That's when Shadow whined, not loud, but high-pitched, and pawed at the bottom of the locker. Elijah reached inside. His fingers grazed something flat, tucked behind the built-in shelving. He pulled it out slowly, a piece of old construction paper, yellowed at the edges, nearly torn. On it was a diagram, hand-drawn in faded blue ink. It wasn't a map of the school, but it looked like one. Only this map showed a floor beneath the known floor. Annotations lined the sides. T0 chamber, main switch, countdown reset. A cold unease settled into Elijah's spine. He looked at Shadow, who now stood with tail straight and eyes focused. Not at the locker, but toward the janitor's closet a few doors down. The bell had never rung that morning. The day hadn't begun. It had shifted, and it wasn't over. The sun had begun to rise higher, warming the frost-bitten rooftops of Redwood Falls with hesitant light. But inside Redwood Union High, the chill hadn't lifted. In the now empty hallway outside the science wing, the only sounds were the low hum of emergency lights and the soft, rhythmic click of Shadow's claws on linoleum as he paced. The faint chemical tang of bomb squad residue still hung in the air. Elijah Granger stood with his arms crossed, face drawn tight, watching the last of the bomb unit's tools being wheeled out. His breath fogged slightly, more from tension than temperature. His thoughts churned as he watched a crime scene technician seal the remains of the makeshift explosive into a lead line case. The device had been simple, but crude didn't mean harmless. It could have torn through lockers, through students, through lives. He turned toward the tech, a young woman with cropped blonde hair and freckled cheeks who wore a vest labeled ATF. Her name Patch read Morales. She looked barely 30, with a calm demeanor that belied the anxiety around her. C4? Elijah asked. No, she said, shaking her head. Homemade nitrate compound. Remote ignition capability. We're still checking for a trigger source. But the timer was real. Set for 9:17, just like you said. Whoever built it knew what they were doing. Maybe, Morales replied, glancing at the remains. But if you ask me, it feels like a dry run. Or worse, bait. Elijah's jaw clenched. His eyes flicked to Shadow, who was now sitting alert beside locker 214, tail still, nose lifted as if reading the air. They hadn't opened the locker again. Not yet. There was something about the note Elijah had found, the crude map with Tizero Chamber, countdown reset scrawled in a hand that didn't belong to a high schooler, that warned him the danger wasn't gone. Across the hallway, Sheriff Terry Long was questioning Miles Petroff. The boy sat on a plastic chair, hands folded, a blanket around his shoulders. Deputy Clairbrant, a tough, middle-aged woman with dark curly hair tucked into a tight bun, stood nearby, arms folded. She was known around town for being firm but fair, especially with kids. Her sharp green eyes didn't miss a twitch. Miles looked numb, his gaze fixed on the floor. "We've run the prints," Terry said, approaching Elijah with a sigh. "No match. Whoever planted that pack either wore gloves or knew exactly how to wipe it clean. Miles says it isn't his bag. I believe him. He's been bullied before," Elijah replied quietly. "This might have been a setup. But why him?" "I don't think he was the target," Elijah said, pulling the folded note from his pocket. "I think he was the distraction." He crouched beside Shadow again and placed the note on the floor. The dog sniffed it, then slowly turned toward the janitor's closet a few doors down, the same direction he'd fixated on earlier. Elijah stood. "I need access to the maintenance records and old blueprints." Sheriff Long frowned. "We're calling a full sweep, but not from Salem. Not the state guys. Someone local. Someone who knows the bones of this building." That's when Gerald Jerry Whitlock entered the hallway. A thin, wiry man in his late 60s, with tobacco-stained fingers and a faded ball cap that said Redwood High Custodial. His uniform shirt was half-buttoned, revealing a flannel undershirt, and his steel-toed boots made a slow clomp across the tiles. Jerry had been the school's head custodian for over 30 years. "They told me you needed old records," he rasped, voice low and gravelly from years of chain-smoking and arguing with leaky boilers. "Do you remember if this school had a basement? Or tunnels?" Elijah asked. Jerry snorted. "Not on any map you've got, it doesn't. But these walls? They hide more than lockers and gum wrappers." He scratched his neck. "Back in the 80s when they built this wing, there was talk about repurposing parts of the old civil defense system under the foundation. Bunker-style stuff from Cold War days. But then budgets dried up. Principal at the time said they sealed it. I always figured it was just sealed with drywall and denial. Can you show me where?" Jerry nodded once. "Follow me." Shadow trotted beside them as Jerry led them past the janitor's closet to a small utility room tucked behind the science labs. Inside, cleaning supplies lined the shelves, and an ancient breaker box buzzed softly in one corner. Jerry moved aside a wheeled mop bucket and pried up a floor panel Elijah hadn't even noticed. Beneath, it was a rusted iron ring. "I ain't opened this in 20 years, Jerry muttered, pulling out a crowbar. With a groan, the trapdoor creaked open, releasing a gust of stale, metallic air. The air smelled like copper and dust, with a sharp chemical note lingering behind it. Shadow growled low, his ears flattened slightly, but he didn't retreat. Elijah switched on his flashlight. The beam pierced the darkness, revealing a narrow stairwell descending into the unknown. "Give me 5 minutes," Elijah said to the others. "If I don't radio in, you want backup?" Morales asked, hand resting on her sidearm. "No, just him." Elijah gave Shadow a nod, and the dog descended first, careful and silent as Shadow should be. The stairwell was damp, and every step creaked. When they reached the bottom, they found a narrow corridor, concrete walls lined with pipes, old cables, and what looked like disconnected ventilation grates. Elijah scanned the area, flashlight steady. Every few feet, a number was painted onto the wall: 201, 202, 203. Finally, he reached a dead end. Except it wasn't. Shadow whined again and began sniffing at a patch of wall that, on closer inspection, had no seams. Elijah ran his fingers across it and found a faint outline, barely visible. In the center, a small metal plate, rusted but etched with a label. Chamber T0. Elijah reached for his radio. "Sheriff, I've got something down here." Looks like a sealed room. Label says T0. I'm going to need cutting tools and a camera drone. Copy that, came the reply. We're on our way. As he waited, Elijah noticed something else. Scratches. Thin claw marks etched along the concrete, just beneath the sealed door. They were old. Faint, but definitely made by an animal. Shadow sat beside them and didn't bark. He just stared. The cutting tool whined through the heavy seal of the metal plate, labeled Chamber T0, sending sparks into the musty air of the underground corridor. Elijah Granger stood back, one hand resting on Shadow's harness, the other gripping his flashlight tight. The stairwell behind them echoed faintly with the footfalls of approaching personnel, Sheriff Terry Long and Deputy Clara Brandt, their faces drawn with both suspicion and dread. When the panel finally gave way, the door groaned open slowly, reluctantly, like it had been holding its breath for decades. A rush of air seeped out, thick, stale, and oddly sweet, the scent of paper rot and chemical residue. Elijah stepped inside first. The chamber beyond was about the size of a classroom, windowless, its concrete walls stained with time and condensation. At the center stood a rusted metal desk with a broken lamp and a half-shattered reel-to-reel machine. Filing cabinets lined one wall, some flung open, others sealed shut with brittle tape marked property of Redwood Research Cooperative. Shadow moved with care, sniffing along the walls and stopping abruptly in front of one cabinet, his tail stiff and low. Elijah knelt and opened it. Inside were manila folders, yellowed and curling, stamped with red ink. Batch T0, Social Dynamics Experimental Logbooks. He flipped one open. Names stare back at him. Not codes, names of students. Many now adults. Some he recognized. Some were still teaching. Others still enrolled. This isn't just a shelter, Elijah said, turning to the sheriff. This was part of something active. Something sanctioned. Or something hidden, Terry muttered. As Elijah examined a second drawer, his radio crackled. Elijah, this is Morales, came the voice of the young ATF agent above ground. You need to come to the library. We found something you're going to want to see. It's dated but connected. I'm on my way. Brandt, stay with the sheriff. Watch that door. And don't touch the tapes yet. He and Shadow made their way out of the chamber, the metallic door swinging shut behind them like a sigh. Upstairs, the library was sealed off, emptied of students, its lights dimmed to prevent media from peeking through the windows. At the far end, behind the reference desk, stood Grace Middleton, the school librarian, clutching a leather-bound ledger to her chest. Grace was in her mid-40s, tall and lean, with shoulder-length copper hair always tied neatly into a loose braid. Her soft voice and calming presence made her a quiet favorite among the more introverted students. But there was a nervousness in her now, a flutter in her eyes like she'd opened something she wished she hadn't. I found it inside the old archive logs, Grace said, placing the book gently onto the desk. It must have been misfiled decades ago, or intentionally hidden. The book creaked as Elijah opened it. Inside, he found careful cursive handwriting in blue ink, the signature at the bottom of the first page reading Dr. Leland Moore, dated May 1976. It began like a mission statement. The Redwood Youth Compliance Initiative, sponsored by private donors and local educational partners, will assess the effectiveness of controlled social stressors on adolescent behavior, identity, and allegiance. Batch designations will align with developmental criteria. Success of Batch T0 will determine scale of rollout. Elijah's blood chilled. They were experimenting on students, he said flatly. Grace nodded slowly. It looks like a behavior modification program. Social pressure, reward/punishment conditioning, even group manipulation strategies. There's mention of controlled peer aggression and forced isolation therapy. Elijah skimmed deeper. Among the entries were coded evaluations of subjects. T0-12, prone to empathetic breakdown. T0-19, withdrawn, excellent control response. No names, only designations. Shadow let out a low growl again, his eyes fixed on a box under the desk. Elijah opened it. Inside were several Polaroids, brittle with age. Most showed empty rooms, cots, and children's desks. But one photo showed a girl, maybe 10 years old, sitting in a metal chair, blindfolded, while a man in a lab coat stood behind her. "I've seen that chair," Elijah said suddenly. "There's one just like it in the T0 chamber." Behind them, Gray spoke softly. "There's something else." A letter was tucked into the book's back cover. She handed it over. It was handwritten, addressed to future oversight, and signed again by Dr. Moore. "If you're reading this, you found what we buried. We were trying to build resilience. You'll see the results. Some of them teach your children now. If they remember, we failed. If they don't, we succeeded." Elijah stood frozen, then turned sharply as the main library doors creaked open again. It was Principal Sandra Holloway, tall and broad-shouldered with short-cropped silver hair and a dark green blazer over a black turtleneck. Known for her stern gaze and relentless calm, Sandra had spent 2 decades as a state education administrator before retiring into small-town work. She walked with purpose, but her expression held something Elijah hadn't seen before: fear. "I heard the vault was opened," she said, voice quiet. "I warned the board this might happen if we kept the building." "You knew?" Elijah asked, eyes narrowing. "I knew parts," she admitted. "I read summaries during my time at the State Department. Rumors, redacted files. They told me it was terminated, that it was all theoretical. Do you know who else knew?" Sandra hesitated. "There was a man, Dr. Randall Cowan. He was one of the lead psychologists on the project. He disappeared in 1984. But before he vanished, he wrote to the DOE, warning that several subjects were exhibiting memory recovery patterns. He feared exposure. The last line in his memo was, 'Dogs remember what humans forget.'" Elijah turned to look at Shadow, who sat quietly now, but watched Sandra with unnerving focus. "I want every record from your time at the DOE," he said. "Unredacted." "I'll do what I can," she said. "But understand, what we're dealing with may not be officially real. That's how these things survive." Outside, the first school buses had returned. Classes were canceled for the rest of the day, and police had cordoned off every wing connected to the discovery. Shadow walked beside Elijah back toward the administrative building, his posture stiff, alert. A student might have been framed. An entire generation might have been manipulated. And someone, maybe more than one person, was still trying to keep it all buried. The question now wasn't what happened. It was who still wanted it to stay hidden, and why. Rain had begun to fall over Redwood Falls, a slow, steady drizzle that turned the parking lot into a mirror of trembling reflections. From the front office windows, you could see the blue and red strobes of emergency vehicles dancing silently across the glass. Inside, the tension had thickened like fog, too heavy to speak through. Elijah Granger stood alone at the faculty printer, copies of Dr. Leland Moore's 1976 initiative summary in hand, ready to send them to Sheriff Long and federal contacts through secure line. But Shadow stirred before he could even hit send. The dog snapped upright, head pivoting toward the east hallway near the nurse's office. His posture tightened. Elijah knew that stance. Nose twitching, body rigid, ears forward like antennae tuned to a sound no human could hear. It wasn't a memory. It was now. "Shadow," Elijah said, voice low. "Where?" The Malinois moved like smoke, darting past the staff break room toward a stainless steel trash bin wedged against the wall near Nurse Holloway's door. A faint chemical smell reached Elijah's nose a second later, acidic, metallic. He rushed forward, calling for a lockdown into his shoulder radio. The nurse's office door opened just then, revealing Nurse Sandra Creighton, a soft-spoken woman in her 50s with thick-rimmed glasses, her dark hair streaked silver and tied back in a tidy bun. She wore a navy cardigan over scrubs and always had peppermint in her pockets. Her face paled at the sight of Elijah and Shadow. "Something wrong?" she asked, instinctively stepping back. "Everyone out of this wing. Now," Elijah said, already pulling her away from the door. "Shadow's got something." She didn't argue, just grabbed her emergency pouch and waved 2 students out a cot inside. Elijah was already pulling the trash bin away. Shadow let out a bark sharp enough to snap glass. Elijah's hands moved faster than thought, tipping the contents of the bin onto the tile. That's when he saw it. A small, black casing, smooth and compact, with red wiring looped around a plastic cylinder. His eyes found the digital screen. 457. He didn't scream. He just moved. Elijah radioed again. Confirmed secondary device, 5-minute timer. East hallway outside nurse's office. Initiate full evacuation. I repeat, full evac. No punto. The response crackled back, full of chaos. Elijah knelt beside the bomb, hand hovering, heart pounding. No time to wait for ATF. This wasn't in a locker. It was here, now, pulsing beneath the floor of a school. Shadow, back. He ordered, and the dog retreated, low and ready. And then Shadow moved again, not away, but toward the opposite wall. He stood near the base of a janitor's supply closet, sniffing, pawing gently. Elijah's breath caught. It wasn't just about this bomb. It was about who was trying to activate it. He scanned the base of the wall, tiles misaligned slightly, moisture-warped drywall. He yanked open the supply door, swept aside brooms and bottles, and found a fuse box with rust along the hinges. Shadow barked once, sharp, deliberate. Elijah opened the box. Inside was a strange configuration, not school standard. A rigged transmitter with a flickering green LED and a small metal switch box affixed to a battery pack. A remote signal relay. It had already been activated. Someone wasn't triggering bombs from within. They were doing it from outside, somewhere off-site, maybe blocks away. And worse, this meant someone inside had to be planting the devices and powering the system. Elijah grabbed the battery casing and ripped the connector out. The LED flickered, blinked out. He raced back to the hallway, the timer still counting down, 2:03. That's when he heard a voice behind him. Step away. It was quiet, level, measured. Elijah turned slowly. Elliot Marlowe, the school's maintenance technician, stood in the shadow of the nurse's doorway. Mid-30s, wiry, with a boyish face that often got him mistaken for a student. He wore gray overalls, always smelled of oil and wood glue. Harmless, or so everyone thought. But not now. In his right hand, he held a small black transmitter, thumb poised over the red button. "Don't move," Marlowe said. His eyes weren't wild. They were hollow. This place, it was supposed to do good. But they lied. They always lied. "Marlowe," Elijah said softly, "what do you know about T0? "I was born into it," he muttered. "Raised in it. My file's in that basement. You probably saw it already." Subject 19. Withdrawn. Excellent control response. They trained us to forget, but you don't forget the dark. Not really. Not when the dogs remember. Shadow stepped forward, silent as a shadow should be. "Those bombs won't fix what they did," Elijah said. "But you can." "I tried," Marlowe whispered. "But no one ever came back for us." And then, from behind, someone else spoke. "I did." Grace Middleton stood just past the hallway junction, her librarian badge swinging slightly. She didn't flinch, didn't run. Her voice was low and steady. "I was Subject 17, she said, looking at Marlowe. "And I remember your name. You used to cry when they turned the lights off. I gave you a paper star, remember? I folded it from one of the worksheets." Marlowe blinked. Elijah took the chance. With a sudden lunge, he kicked the device out of Marlowe's hand. Shadow was already in motion, knocking the man to the ground and pinning him with a paw across the chest. The timer on the bomb read 0:38. Elijah dropped, opened the casing, and, thanks to his military training, pulled the power lead straight from the detonator circuit. The screen died. Just a blank void. Marlowe sobbed beneath Shadow's hold. "I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted someone to know it happened." Grace knelt beside them, her voice soft. "We know now, and it ends here." Evening settled over Redwood Falls like a bruised sky, stretching itself thin. The last of the emergency vehicles had pulled away from Redwood Union High, but the school still looked like a crime scene. Cordon halls, flickering lights, and silence that clung to the walls. The storm had returned with a gentle persistence, tapping against the windows like fingers asking permission to come in. But inside, something far more dangerous had already slipped through the cracks. Elijah Granger sat in the administration office, leaning forward with eyes fixed on the aging screen of a recovered security terminal. His fingers moved with purpose across the keys. Grace had found a stack of old hard drives stored in the locked AV room. equipment supposedly decommissioned years ago. Most were corrupted, but one had held just enough fragments to build a partial security log. It was Deputy Clara Brandt who suggested the off-grid cache. That system was separate from the main building's network, built into the old infrastructure when the place still ran under military guidance. Now Elijah stared at shaky, black-and-white video footage from 2 weeks ago. No audio, time-stamped at 6:03 a.m. A figure entered the East Maintenance Wing carrying a black duffel bag. The image was grainy. The person in frame mostly turned away, but the moment they paused near the panel that led to the hidden transmitter, Elijah paused the footage. The profile turned just enough. It was Raymond Ellis, the school's vice principal. Late 60s, tall and stately with a full head of snow-white hair and an ever-meticulous wardrobe of sweater vests and pressed trousers. His tone was often grandfatherly, his praise warm, but distant, like a man mimicking empathy. He rarely raised his voice, rarely smiled, either. Most students said he gave off a feeling of watching, not caring. Elijah felt a cold clarity settle over him. Ellis wasn't helping cover it up. He'd never stopped orchestrating it. Sheriff Long and Clara were still questioning Elliot Marlowe. The technician turned subject turned accomplice, but Elijah didn't wait. He printed a single still image from the footage, clipped it into a folder, and clipped Shadow's leash to his harness. The dog rose without a sound, eyes locked on the hallway ahead, as if he already knew where they were going. They found Ellis alone. He was in the lower archive room, an old records annex adjacent to the locked library basement, a place few staff used anymore. The light flickered from an exposed bulb above, casting his silhouette over shelves filled with forgotten textbooks and yellowing student files. He was holding a framed certificate, a commendation from the Department of Defense dated 1978. "You're early," Ellis said without turning. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "I thought you'd wait until morning." Elijah didn't move closer. "You put the transmitter in the nurse's wing." "I did." "You activated the relay system, built it to accept remote triggers." "Yes." Elijah's voice dropped. "You were going to detonate that bomb, finish what Marlowe started." Ellis finally turned, setting the frame gently on the nearby shelf. His face, pale and serene, showed no hint of regret. His eyes, light gray and sharp, held an eerie steadiness. "I was going to reassert order," he said. "I had hoped to do it without violence. I never asked Elliot to harm anyone. The threat was supposed to be theoretical, controlled. You're talking about manipulating kids. I'm talking about protecting them," Ellis said. "You think TikTok and unsupervised internet access are harmless? They're being bombarded every second by misinformation, by chaos. Back in the program, we believed in containment, control, discipline. Yes, fear too, but tempered fear. The kind that makes you sit up straighter and listen." Shadow growled low, ears flattened. Elijah stepped forward now. "You ran behavioral experiments on children, without their knowledge, without their consent, under direct federal contracts," Ellis said smoothly. "I wasn't rogue. I was reassigned, scapegoated. And when the programs were shut down, I went underground. But I never stopped believing in the goal. Order through understanding. Control through science. This school, this quiet little town, was supposed to be the next model." Elijah narrowed his eyes. "You wanted to restart the experiments." Ellis nodded slowly. "Marlowe was proof it worked. He remembered. He returned. That level of psychological imprint doesn't happen by accident. And you were going to trigger the final device? I had to know if the emotional recovery cycle could be broken, if the subjects would revert to stability or collapse." Elijah reached behind him, hand brushing his sidearm, but before he could speak, Ellis moved. Not fast, but calculated. He stepped toward the wall and reached behind a filing cabinet. Shadow barked, lunged. Elijah shouted, "Shadow, hold." But the Malinois had already tackled Ellis, bringing the old man to the ground with a heavy thud. A small black detonator rolled from Ellis' hand across the floor. Elijah kicked it away, his pulse racing. Within seconds, the door opened. Clara Brandt rushed in, weapon raised. Behind her, Agent Julia Kerr, Recently arrived from the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit. Entered quietly, a lean, observant woman in her late 30s with chestnut hair pinned back and slate blue eyes that missed nothing. She wore no expression as she surveyed the scene. Did he confess? Kerr asked. Elijah nodded. And the final bomb? Disarmed, he said, just like the others. But he was ready to use it. Kerr knelt beside Ellis, who lay pinned beneath Shadow's weight, face flushed but composed. You ran programs like this before, she said. In Nevada, and later, Ohio. We found the old clearance logs. Half your files were burned. Ellis looked at her. And still you came. Because you know it worked. Agent Kerr said nothing. She simply stood, signaling to Clara to cuff him. Ellis didn't struggle. As they let him out, Elijah crouched beside Shadow, running a hand down the dog's back. The Malinois looked up at him, ears alert but calm now. Behind them, Grace appeared at the edge of the hall, arms crossed, lips tight. I knew there was someone else, she said quietly. Someone higher. It was never just Marlowe. No, Elijah agreed. But now we know who pulled the strings. The rain had stopped sometime during the night, but Redwood Falls still wore the hush of a place exhaling after a storm. Clouds hung low like cautious ghosts, unwilling to let the light through all at once. The school grounds at Redwood Union High were quiet, taped off and patrolled, but no longer under lockdown. Classes remained suspended. No bell-rang. No students passed through the halls. Just crows overhead and the occasional creak of old metal catching wind. But life, however changed, had begun to trickle back in. The basement chamber, Chamber T0, had been sealed the previous day. The FBI's Forensics Division, led by Agent Julia Kerr, had removed over a dozen boxes of classified documents, several analog tape reels, and the rusted control equipment that had once powered a secret. The hatch that once led below had been filled in with concrete, a steel plate welded over the entrance. Kerr said it was to prevent temptation. Elijah Granger thought it was to bury guilt. He stood now in a main quad, facing the school's south lawn, where a small ceremony was taking place. A modest statue had been unveiled, a life-sized bronze likeness of Shadow, mid-step, ears perked, nose lifted as if tracking truth itself. At the base of the statue, etched in the same serif font used on official plaques across government buildings, were the words, "He listened when no one did." Shadow himself sat beside the sculpture, his real form older, leaner, but just as alert. He had been brushed and polished by a vet tech earlier that morning, his coat gleaming dark gold and black in the soft morning light. Students and teachers had come to take pictures, many kneeling beside the dog who had saved them without ever speaking a word. He accepted it all in quiet dignity, only moving when Elijah gave the subtle nod that meant time to go. Elijah was no longer in uniform. Today he wore a gray wool cardigan over a dark shirt, sleeves pushed up to the elbows. He looked taller somehow, without the badge, more at ease, though his face still bore the lines of someone who had seen too much to fully relax. His hair had grown slightly longer, peppered with silver, and his eyes remained sharp but softer now around the edges. He had declined the promotion offered by the school district, the newly created director of school security. Instead, he had taken something else, a chance to teach. Next week, Elijah Granger would begin teaching a new elective at Redwood Union High, life skills and truth literacy, a blend of survival training, ethics, and emotional intelligence. It had been approved unanimously by the board. Elijah insisted it wasn't about exposing conspiracies or decoding psychological manipulation. It was about listening, learning when something fell off, trusting instinct, even if you couldn't explain it yet. And then there was Lily. His daughter, now a sophomore, had been absent the day of the second bomb threat. She'd come home late the night of the arrest, her hoodie soaked, backpack dragging behind her. She hadn't said much that night, just poured herself cereal and sat in silence. But the next morning, she stood in the kitchen doorway and said the word he hadn't heard in nearly 10 years. "Dad." He turned, slow and uncertain, and she just nodded once, her green eyes rimmed with something between sorrow and forgiveness. That had been enough. Meanwhile, Grace Middleton had continued her own search. The librarian had returned to the sealed archive room, not illegally, but quietly, under federal supervision. There, in a locked cabinet mislabeled District Storage, 1989, she had found a folder with no name, no file number, and no record in any index. Inside, one photo, one evaluation sheet, and a single line typed in red across the top. Subject 10, relocated to foster care. Unknown status. The photograph was unmistakable. A little girl, maybe 8, hair and braided pigtails, standing in front of a wooden fence. Bright eyes, tilted smile, but a sadness too deep for her age. Grace stared at it for a long time, because she knew that face. It was her own. Agent Kerr had been present during the discovery. There were rumors of more subjects, she said. Files lost, names scrubbed. We didn't think anyone from Batch T0 had survived undocumented. Grace didn't respond. She only placed the photo back into the folder and sealed it again. Later that afternoon, she walked to the edge of the field behind the school, the part where the trees began and the fence faded into wild brush. There, she simply stood, holding the folder close to her chest, as though the wind might take it if she let go. "Do you believe in closure?" she asked, softly, to no one in particular. Elijah approached, stopping a few feet behind. "Not really," he said, "but I believe in knowing what happened, even if we don't understand all of it." She smiled faintly. "There's always another door, and sometimes another subject," Elijah said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope, weathered and creased. "They gave me access to some of the personal effects recovered from Ellis's office," he said. "This was hidden behind one of the baseboards." Grace opened it slowly. Inside was a folded note in Ellis's handwriting. 10 remembered more than the others. She drew maps, names, even dreams. "I regret not erasing more, but I needed her to retain. I needed someone to remember, just in case I forgot." Grace folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. She said nothing more, but her hand trembled slightly at her side. That night, Elijah sat alone on his porch. The breeze was gentle. Shadow lay at his feet, eyes closed, but ears twitching with every shift of the trees. A knock came at the door. It was Clara Brandt, off duty now, hair loose over her shoulders, leather jacket zipped halfway. She carried a cardboard box. "I thought you'd want this," she said. "It's the final batch of tapes from Chamber T0. FBI cleared them, so they're yours if you want to keep listening." Elijah took the box, but didn't move to open it. He looked at her. "You staying in Redwood?" "For now," she said. "Someone's got to help teach these kids to spot the real danger." "And what's that?" Clara smirked. "The kind that says it's here to protect you." She left soon after. Elijah placed the box beside the door and sat back down. He didn't open it that night. He didn't need to, because some things you already know before you hear them, and some things only the dog ever truly hears. The rain had stopped sometime during the night, but Redwood Falls still wore the hush of a place exhaling after a storm. Clouds hung low like cautious ghosts, unwilling to let the light through all at once. The school grounds at Redwood Union High were quiet, taped off and patrolled, but no longer under lockdown. Classes remained suspended. No bell. No students passed through the halls. Just crows overhead and the occasional creak of old metal catching wind. But life, however changed, had begun to trickle back in. The basement chamber, Chamber T0, had been sealed the previous day. The FBI's Forensics Division, led by Agent Julia Kerr, had removed over a dozen boxes of classified documents, several analog tape reels, and the rusted control equipment that had once powered a secret. The hatch that once led below had been filled in with concrete, a steel plate welded over the entrance. Kerr said it was to prevent temptation. Elijah Granger thought it was to bury guilt. He stood now in a main quad, facing the school's south lawn, where a small ceremony was taking place. A modest statue had been unveiled, a life-sized bronze likeness of Shadow, mid-step, ears perked, nose lifted as if tracking truth itself. At the base of the statue, etched in the same serif font used on official plaques across government buildings, were the words, "He listened when no one did." Shadow himself sat beside the sculpture, his real form older, leaner, but just as alert. He had been brushed and polished by a vet tech earlier that morning, his coat gleaming dark gold and black in the soft morning light. Students and teachers had come to take pictures, many kneeling beside the dog who had saved them without ever speaking a word. He accepted it all in quiet dignity, only moving when Elijah gave the subtle nod that meant time to go. Elijah was no longer in uniform. Today he wore a gray wool cardigan over a dark shirt, sleeves pushed up to the elbows. He looked taller somehow, without the badge, more at ease, though his face still bore the lines of someone who had seen too much to fully relax. His hair had grown slightly longer, peppered with silver, and his eyes remained sharp but softer now around the edges. He had declined the promotion offered by the school district, the newly created director of school security. Instead, he had taken something else, a chance to teach. Next week, Elijah Granger would begin teaching a new elective at Redwood Union High, life skills and truth literacy, a blend of survival training, ethics, and emotional intelligence. It had been approved unanimously by the board. Elijah insisted it wasn't about exposing conspiracies or decoding psychological manipulation. It was about listening, learning when something fell off, trusting instinct, even if you couldn't explain it yet. And then there was Lily. His daughter, now a sophomore, had been absent the day of the second bomb threat. She'd come home late the night of the arrest, her hoodie soaked, backpack dragging behind her. She hadn't said much that night, just poured herself cereal and sat in silence. But the next morning, she stood in the kitchen doorway and said the word he hadn't heard in nearly 10 years. Dad. He turned, slow and uncertain, and she just nodded once, her green eyes rimmed with something between sorrow and forgiveness. That had been enough. Meanwhile, Grace Middleton had continued her own search. The librarian had returned to the sealed archive room, not illegally, but quietly, under federal supervision. There, in a locked cabinet mislabeled District Storage 1989, she had found a folder with no name, no file number, and no record in any index. Inside, one photo, one evaluation sheet, and a single line typed in red across the top. Subject 10, relocated to foster care. Unknown status. The photograph was unmistakable. A little girl, maybe 8, hair and braided pigtails, standing in front of a wooden fence. Bright eyes, tilted smile, but a sadness too deep for her age. Grace stared at it for a long time, because she knew that face. It was her own. Agent Kerr had been present during the discovery. There were rumors of more subjects, she said. Files lost, names scrubbed. We didn't think anyone from Batch T0 had survived undocumented. Grace didn't respond. She only placed the photo back into the folder and sealed it again. Later that afternoon, she walked to the edge of the field behind the school, the part where the trees began and the fence faded into wild brush. There, she simply stood, holding the folder close to her chest, as though the wind might take it if she let go. "Do you believe in closure?" she asked, softly, to no one in particular. Elijah approached, stopping a few feet behind. "Not really," he said, "but I believe in knowing what happened, even if we don't understand all of it." She smiled faintly. "There's always another door, and sometimes another subject," Elijah said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope, weathered and creased. "They gave me access to some of the personal effects recovered from Ellis's office," he said. "This was hidden behind one of the baseboards." Grace opened it slowly. Inside was a folded note in Ellis's handwriting. 10 remembered more than the others. She drew maps, names, even dreams. "I regret not erasing more, but I needed her to retain. I needed someone to remember, just in case I forgot." Grace folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. She said nothing more, but her hand trembled slightly at her side. That night, Elijah sat alone on his porch. The breeze was gentle. Shadow lay at his feet, eyes closed, but ears twitching with every shift of the trees. A knock came at the door. It was Clara Brandt, off duty now, hair loose over her shoulders, leather jacket zipped halfway. She carried a cardboard box. "I thought you'd want this," she said. "It's the final batch of tapes from Chamber T0. FBI cleared them, so they're yours if you want to keep listening." Elijah took the box, but didn't move to open it. He looked at her. "You staying in Redwood?" "For now," she said. Someone's got to help teach these kids to spot the real danger. And what's that? Clara smirked. The kind that says it's here to protect you. She left soon after. Elijah placed the box beside the door and sat back down. He didn't open it that night. He didn't need to, because some things you already know before you hear them. And some things only the dog ever truly hears.